morning, Melanie. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I am great. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you so much for making time to be here today on our startup chat. And I so intrigued and excited to speak to you today, especially since you are a fellow lawyer. So do you mind just sharing a little bit of how you got to where you were?
Absolutely. And certainly I quote unquote feel the pain. I know that even, last night I was actually reflecting on, do I have the pipeline of business that I need? Do I need to be working different angles? So I completely understand if you're thinking about the entrepreneurial journey or you're new to it, how scary it can be. For me, I served as a attorney for approximately 14 years, and I do still practice. It's just that I've remanaged my time so that instead of serving as an equity shareholder and then manager of a branch office that took a considerable amount of time, I took a slight step back in the practice of law. So I'm now of counsel that doesn't require as many responsibilities. So I can serve my legal clients well, while then working on my brand, Spread Your Sunshine. And I call it a brand because it was started as a personal brand to complement my full-time law practice. At the time, I was doing a lot of mentoring, which will be probably a theme of this conversation. And I realized that in order to really serve all of the people who are contacting me well, it would be helpful to have a platform where I could scale my advice and offer some of the general tips and strategies, say online or through webinars, and then have more meaningful, succinct conversations one-on-one so that I could actually answer those questions and get to everybody with my finite amount of time, just like everybody has 24 hours.
Right.
And with that, it just grew a life of its own, and really is where I started to think about how do I want to serve in the legal profession, and then also what is my unique skill set as an entrepreneur, as someone who's a mentor and loves building confidence in others and helping them to then build out Spread Your Sunshine and balance those. So kind of fast forward as to how we got to today in 2021 when we're taping this.
Right, awesome. And so you mentioned two words that are words that I hear in the entrepreneurial space, which is scaling and branding. Yep. Not something that I hear in the law firm, legal world. So was that something that you learned about or you knew? How did you start to understand that the practice of law is different than actually building a business?
The first way that I understood it for people in the legal industry listening to this is that earlier in my practice, I remember that there were a lot of Florida firms that essentially had the mantra that our attorneys will bring in the work and they will do the work. And because a lot of Florida law firms, and I presume law firms, I know you have listeners all over the US and throughout the world, there are a lot of law firms that feel comfortable budgeting that way. What that also means is that you could only up your rate incrementally per year. And at some point, you probably cap out in terms of your clients and what their ability is to pay, even if they're wonderful clients. And so point being is that at some point, your book of business, if you continue to bring in the work and do it yourself, will never exceed X amount of dollars, whatever that is for you. And when I realized that was the goal of most law firms, was to really restrain attorneys in that way, I think it works for a lot of professionals, but for others who really want to build a book of business or see how big they can get a business, then they're never going to be able to work on that, right? So to your point, I learned a lot more about scaling and branding and the importance of it once I started working on the entrepreneurial side, because it's not something that really is taught in the law firm or legal community. And honestly, by some firms really isn't desired, whether they realize it or not.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. And so you sound very confident in your knowledge. And I read a little bit about your journey. You talked about imposter syndrome. And so have you addressed or resolved that feeling that you've been carrying for some time? And how does it look now for you?
I don't think you ever resolve it, or if there is someone who's 100% resolved it, I want to meet them. No, sincerely, that is not a joke. That is not a rhetoric. Please reach out to me. I want to know your strategies and join you on that bandwagon. But in all seriousness, my headspace and mental health looks completely different and in a better place than it was, say, 5 years ago, before I started working on Spread Your Sunshine and studying mental health and wellness and working on these issues so much more. And so the example that I would give is that not only do I think I was confined maybe to more a traditional route And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was just the way that when I was quote unquote growing up, if you did well in school, you went to grad school. And if you did well in grad school, you went into the profession. You weren't necessarily encouraged to explore other opportunities or other passions. And so, learning to do that and not be worried about quote unquote failing is certainly a big hurdle that I've overcome, as well as not constantly dwelling. I would say the really big word that I focus on, because I think so many of us, especially people that are in a competitive industry like the legal field or finance or accounting, there's so much pressure on you to be perfect all the time that you think about when it's appropriate to be perfect. Say if it's a big project, let's say you're defending someone who's up for the death penalty, that is the time to be perfect, right? Same time, there may be something else like a simple cover letter or an invitation to a party that doesn't demand perfection and you're spending too much time on it. So I have really learned to think about time differently, to think about perfection differently. And that when I do make a quote unquote mistake, not to dwell on it and to learn from it and move forward, which again, I think is a big difference that I certainly didn't see in my life previously or in the life of my peers.
Wow. Yeah. And I can say personally, I struggle with that also, as a lawyer. And I haven't heard that term used very much. I feel it and I know it. And I speak to other colleagues about that same perfection feeling of no matter how well you do for a client, sometimes it doesn't feel like it's good enough. And then when you do make a mistake, I'm so hard on myself, that it wasn't the way it should have been. And so is that something that you see or have seen with some of the individuals that you're now working with in your business?
Absolutely. Two thoughts that come to mind there is that one, and I talk about this frequently because it is such a big issue, is that one of the steps, so to speak, to working on these issues is to forgive yourself. And that may not seem counterintuitive, but for instance, if you're a habitual procrastinator, one of the best ways you can get over procrastination, in addition to working on other time management techniques, but is to forgive yourself from past transgressions. Because if you just continue to worry about that and dwell on it, you're going to continue to make the same mistake over and over and over. And think about that, because we would forgive others and complete strangers for far less, and break ourselves over the coal, to your point, for a little perceived imperfection. And that was my second point to what you just said, is that these days I really do spend a lot of time thinking about when good is good enough. And I think that a lot of times our standards as to ourselves are way too high. And a perfect example that I usually use here is that, for instance, I do quite a bit of keynote speaking. And so frequently with those responsibilities comes the obligation to turn in a PowerPoint. And of course, I want that to be readable and look nice. But there's some point in time where if my content is excellent, then making that PowerPoint prettier, if I'm playing with the fonts, the size, which font I'm using, adding in clip art, it's not going to add any additional value, right? I have probably spent the requisite time to look professional. It's the content that I deliver that orally in that presentation that is going to make the biggest impact. And so, that's something to think about, is when you're working on something, are you truly making a material difference? Or are you just playing with something and not spending your time wisely because of this unideal or heightened perfection standard that you have? It just doesn't need to exist.
Right. Yeah. So I hear you saying a lot of it has to do basically with retraining how we think about things. Is that a
100%?
statement?
100%. And I don't know about you, but I didn't think about it in this way. And a question that I frequently ask audiences is, how many people have gone on a diet to lose 5 pounds or more? And almost everybody in the audience will raise their hands, right? Most people can raise it, multiple times throughout their lifetime. And then I'll pause and say, how many of you have gone on a diet to lose 5% or more of your negativity? And almost no one's hand goes up. Usually 1 or 2 people that have done the hard work. But point being is that just like it requires monitoring your diet, your physical exercise, your movement to have a good physical physique, it's the same thing when it comes to a healthy mental brain. You aren't just gonna wake up one day and think, gosh, I want to think more positively. Certainly that helps, but you're going to need to have a quote unquote routine that gets your brain used to thinking that way. And then for me, like I said, while I have certainly gone further and retrained my brain better than it was before, it still lapses, just like you're on a diet, eat the cookie. You got to have a plan to then get back on the train, right? Same thing with mental the day that anxiety and doubt and fear starts creeping in, you've got to have a game plan for how do I tell myself it's okay and that I need to move forward.
Gotcha. So tell me a little about your business, Spread Your Sunshine. What do you do, and how do you help startup communities or clients with your business?
Yeah, so I would say there's 3 key things that we do. The first one is small business consulting. And so certainly with just like you, with my legal background, and then now having a small business, just like you running your firm, certainly we see both sides of it, right? We not only know how to provide the substantive legal services, but we also know what it's like to actually work with a CPA and balance our books and, meet payroll and all of the things. So there's a lot that I can do to help small businesses on both sides in terms of consulting, and certainly when it comes to the personal branding piece and a lot of the startup pieces. I also, as I mentioned, do a lot of keynote speaking as well as private trainings. So working on various issues in terms of communication skills, building confidence, personal branding, etc. And if you go to the spreadyoursunshine.com website and click on our speaking and trainings tab, then you'll see a drop-down list of our top presentations and all the learning objectives that go along with each one. Awesome. And the best way to solidify those messages, and you see some of them behind me, but Sunshine makes inspirational products as well. So stationery, Post-it notes, affirmation cards, or positivity cards, things that work really well to uplift and empower your community, your team. If you work as a manager, if you're a teacher, whatever it may be, to give those out and spread your sunshine. And so those are available on our website as well.
Great. Yes. And the colors are beautiful, the theming. So I love your brand. It just looks gorgeous.
Thank you. And I love what you're doing to help entrepreneurs with this podcast and vlog. It's just so awesome.
Yeah, it's been an exciting project for me. Like you, I'm a lawyer. And so my background, which I imagine, perhaps you can probably relate, is we do a lot of fixing problems after things have already been broken. And so I really wanted to step into a space where we were helping people before the problems happened.
Yes.
Setting things up, and what you do and what a lot of other professionals do to help support that, I'm finding is necessary, because again, as a lawyer, it's just me. I'm the only, the client is only looking to me for legal advice. And there are times when I understand it goes deeper than just legal advice. A lot of where they're at mentally, psychologically will impact how I can serve them. And so these conversations I never get to have with my clients, so it's great. I think the message is probably more welcome in the startup world. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you do small business consulting. What would you say are the 3 top tips that you would give to entrepreneurs, business owners, and even startups?
Yeah, I would say one is don't think of failures as failures. I really want to get that word out of the English language, all languages, not just English, all languages, but they're really opportunities to learn. And so I always ask myself, when something doesn't go as planned, I may give myself a small period of what I call mourning. So of course you're going to be disappointed, but after, taking a deep breath to think about, okay, that didn't go as planned, I'm disappointed. But I ask myself, is there anything I could have done differently? And if the answer to that question is yes, which it oftentimes is, then I learn from what happened and move on and implement those changes. And oppositely, if the answer to the question is no, that I could not have done anything differently, to the extent I could, I knocked it out of the park, then I self-reflect and think, well, then maybe the path I was on isn't unfortunately the right one for me. And as disappointing as that is, then I need to keep going because there's some other purpose that I meant to serve. And that really ties into number 2, is that I would really encourage you to listen both to your community that you serve, whether it's through products or services, and also to the people who love you the most. Because what I mean by that is you likely have an idea in your head of what you want to work on. Mm-hmm. Idea may not best match what your community wants to receive from you and or what your community is telling you that you are best at. And so once you allow that to sink in, then you may change and pivot and go a different direction and be the better for it. So always be listening and trying to modify so that you can be the best that you can be. And the last thing that I would say, and of course I used this word earlier, but I would seek out as many mentors as you can. And depending upon where you're at in your entrepreneurial journey, it may require finding quote unquote new mentors. So for me, certainly there are legal giants that I still look up to in the law profession. But then when I started making products, to your point, they knew nothing, right, about scaling, keystoning, wholesaling. If I use those terms, they may have a vague idea of what those things mean in the English language. They don't actually know what they mean in terms of business or how to implement them. And so for me, when I entered that side of business that was completely new, it required finding new mentors that were actually in that space who could then give me guidance, just like my legal mentors had previously. So always be looking for someone who wants to reach their dominant hand back and lift you up, because there are so many people out there, and it will be incredibly helpful to you and save you a lot of time and energy if you learn from others who have done it well.
Great. I agree. I too have been culling new mentors as I, also navigate this space. And it's, being in the legal profession for a long time, it's nice. It almost feels refreshing, to hear some of the businesses and their journeys and all of that. And then to apply it to where I am, or to where my clients are. It's a beautiful merging, I think, of the two, types of the business and the legal. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk about employees. And I want to talk about employers and tie it into what you do. We also do employment law and advising, day-to-day advice, and helping organizations set up their HR department or their legal department. And one of the things that I have seen or really struggle in communicating to our clients, in particular our startup clients, is that who you are as a person, as a leader, is reflected in your staff, in your people. And if you are in a space where you don't feel confident, or you feel like the imposter syndrome is creeping up, there could be a million reasons where you're not in a good space.
Mm-hmm.
It will trickle down. And so have you had those conversations with leaders in terms of how do you make that change so that you can impact your organization as a whole?
Absolutely. I think that as a leader of an organization, it's so multifaceted. So there's so many things you have to be thinking about. But to your point, certainly the leadership at the top sets the tone. And one of the things that I think about, that I understand from a legal standpoint, you have to dot your I's and cross your T's.
Mm-hmm.
But my business owner hat, and this is where it's great that we have both worlds and can see it both ways and help advise, is that these people are also human beings that are working for and with you. And at the end of the day, they're making your dream become a reality. And so sometimes I think there's a happy medium between, what the policy may look like or what you think a boss should do versus the humanity of it. And the more that you're not able to not only be a positive leader, but to also make the place, and I understand this may change over time as your organization gets bigger and bigger, but especially when you're smaller, the more things that you can do to create a great culture and make it a fun and flexible place to work, I think is going to serve you so well in terms of your interactions. Is, what is the best thing from a human standpoint in that interaction? And can you be flexible with the policies? Can you make it a great place to work? And also think about how much you want to share and when. I recently read a great book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, who is a serial entrepreneur and now capital venturist. But one of the things that he pointed out was the difference between wartime and peacetime communications. And that sometimes if you are a startup that is barely hanging on by your teeth, maybe you have, 2 days of payroll in the bank, you may need to be more honest with your employees about where you truly are and the fact that it is make it or break it, or you won't survive. On the other hand, if you're in a good place and you have more of a cushion, I still think it's important to be honest with your employees. I'm not saying that to be honest, but in terms of the actual stress that you need to burden versus what you can also share with your employees, I think at that point stays more on your shoulders so that you're creating this great image, not only for them in terms of a happy place to work, but also positioning your company in the marketplace.
Gotcha. And what have you seen? Have you seen the other side of when they do that? If someone is honest and open with their staff, what does that look like on the other side when they get there?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a personal example. So for instance, when coronavirus hit, I was watching TV and I'm watching the stock market plummet to levels that hadn't been seen since the Great Depression. And I'm thinking to myself, my employees may or may not be TV junkies or news junkies like I am, but certainly if they are, they're watching the same thing, right? And they're probably wondering themselves, how many days of payroll does Spread Your Sunshine have in the bank? Because it wasn't too much longer. And then of course we start hearing about the payroll protection program, businesses folding, having to lay off employees. And so I was really honest with each of my employees. I think at the time we had about a half dozen employees, so not a large organization, but certainly it wasn't just me. And with each of them, I was really realistic about this is where we are at in terms of payroll. This is what is in the pipeline. And I cannot promise you that you will have a job a month from now, a year from now, whatever the amount of payroll was. I honestly don't remember the exact amount, but my point was, I said, what I do promise you is that if it gets to the point where I think we are going to have issues making it, I will tell you that in advance with enough lead time and help you secure another job to the extent of my ability. Again, cannot promise you I will do that, but or be able to do that, but I will certainly use every effort that I can to connect you somewhere that will be able to provide you with a paycheck, because I know how important and valuable that is to you and your family. And point being is that it went over extremely well. We didn't lose a single employee. They all felt comfortable because now they're not guessing, right? They're not thinking to themselves, oh gosh, is Spread Your Sunshine gonna be able to meet payroll this week or not? They knew point blank, we are good until this point. And unless that happens, we're still flying above the radar. And if we do get to that point and need help, I will tell you. And so, that's where I say, sometimes meld the human standpoint with, the quote unquote HR regs and policies. I know there are reasons for that. And especially again, in your bigger organizations, but when you're small and there's an elephant in the room, address it, because then your employees are going to want to show up and make sure that you do have the resources necessary to keep their jobs, right? And they're going to likely help you. Whereas if they're uncertain, they're going to be spending that same time looking for another job, and you don't want their attention diverted. You want them focused again on the dream and making it happen and being alive.
Right. So you're being transparent, which I'm sure they appreciated 100%.
100%.
Yes. Great. Awesome advice. I appreciate your time and all the tips. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like to leave the viewers with?
The only thing that I can add, because you've been fabulous today as a hostess, is that if you are interested in learning more material about Spread Your Sunshine, in addition to our website, spreadyoursunshine.com, we also are available on 5 social media platforms. We are at Spread Your Sunshine on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and at sunshine_women on Twitter. And we look forward to hopefully connecting with you further there and sharing our valuable resources with you. And in the meantime, just thank you for this opportunity to chat with you. It's been awesome connecting today.
Likewise, I feel your energy and I love it. So
good.
You're doing
Yeah,
a good job.
Use some energy today, right? Get our step.
Yes. Thank you. And I look forward to speaking again, maybe on a different topic. So I thank you, and I encourage everyone to go out and check out your messages and even spread the word that you're doing for all of us out here. So thank you.